So continuing on with the effects of sustainability on health and well-being, previously I left off with, in this case, climate change. So we're talking about the greenhouse effect again. The greenhouse effect is what happens is more heat is trapped as the effect of more carbon dioxide, one of the gases, is actually more released into the atmosphere here. There's actually other greenhouse gases. Nitrous oxide is also a greenhouse gas. Methane is actually also a greenhouse gas. Sulfur dioxide is also a greenhouse gas. So there's actually a lot of, in this case, substances that can actually trap heat instead of heat escaping into the, in this case, outside the Earth's atmosphere. Okay, so there's actually a lot of harmful effects for health for the greenhouse effect. Okay, so what happens is we know that the polar caps are made up of ice, mostly fresh water, and as the planet heats, those polar ice caps melt, and what happens with seawater is it becomes less salty. Okay, when the seawater becomes less salty, what happens is salt water actually traps more heat. What happens is if your salt water becomes less salty and becomes more fresh water like, what happens then is there are actually much more extremes in weather patterns, as we see with hurricanes, with the intensity of rains, with rainfall. And again, it's just this obvious extremes in weather that has not happened, that has rarely happened in the past, but now is much more occurring at a faster rate. Okay, so that is actually one of the effects of the greenhouse gases. The other thing, obviously, again, and I'm not going to digress about this, is in a lot of places, and we're going to see soon, there's going to be problems again with livable places. There was a point in time in which in Arizona, the actual garbage cans actually melted, and their planes could not actually take off from the actual airport because they were scared that components of planes were actually melting at that point. So again, the climate change, we don't call it global warming, by the way, we call it climate change, because it's not just warming, it's actually extremes in temperature, that's actually extremes in weather patterns that's actually occurring. Okay, this is actually no longer quite applicable because we have banned chlorofluorocarbons now. Chlorofluorocarbons used to be a big component, as a main component of propellants in aerosol cans. Okay, and so what happens with chlorofluorocarbons is it actually gets released into the atmosphere. We actually have this protective layer that actually prevents ultraviolet radiation, harmful ultraviolet radiation from hitting the atmosphere, called ozone. Ozone is actually 3 oxygens instead of 2. So chlorofluorocarbons depletes ozone, and because we have less ozone, what happens is there's more ultraviolet radiation that actually hits the surface of the Earth, and that actually increases the rate of skin cancer for most humans. So this is one of the, actually, as you can see in this diagram here. Luckily, we have banned a lot of chlorofluorocarbons now, so actually that's a good thing. And but so far, as we know, there's still a huge amount. There's actually still a very low amounts of ozone on the poles. Okay, specifically the North Pole. So this is still in process as we speak. Okay, so climate change. One of the other effects of climate change, because of this extreme weather patterns, is, and if you can see here, is the loss of, in this case, fertile land. Okay, that's actually what desertification is, in which plants can actually grow. As we can see here in the United States, the western United States is actually affected by this desertification, and it's primarily because of 2 reasons. So one, obviously, is in this case, lack of rain is one of them. The other one is obviously extreme heat. Okay, now I don't know if you can see this. This is actually coincides with the equator. This is actually where the sun normally travels. Okay, now if you can look at the equator, not all countries in the equator actually suffer from high desertification vulnerability, and it just so happens that desertification vulnerability, or the likelihood for your topography to become a desert, is actually related to the plant cover. Okay, so plants, especially mature plants, we're talking about trees. If you've ever been to a forest anywhere in the world, especially a tropical rainforest, we know the tropical rainforest is, there's this huge trees that provides this canopy that actually covers the forest floor, and you actually have deep foliage in the ground. Okay, what happens is plants, even though it might be a hot weather, the rain that actually comes in is actually trapped by plants. So plants actually keeps the water from, in this case, from rainfall. Okay, and in turn, and also, and that's actually one of the reasons why tropical forests, in this case, are actually highly humid, and the reason why it's all of that water is actually, in this case, trapped by the plants and trapped in the soil, where, like in this tropical rainforest. Now, if you have a lack of mature trees, like in this case fully grown trees, what happens then is when rain comes, rain, instead of being trapped in the soil, is actually instantly evaporates. So no matter how you could have you could have, like, I don't know, 12 inches of rain every month, okay, but if you do not have plants to actually trap, and like, we're not talking about just grass here, we're talking about like mature plants again, like trees, okay, then what happens is all those inches of rain means nothing, because that rain evaporates immediately, almost immediately, because of extreme heat. That's A. B, when there is when you have no no foliage, no trees, what happens is rain actually runs off. Okay, so again, so right now the Western United States is not a very good place to live. I know the weather there is amazing, right? We have very, very warm weather, but I'm telling you right now, we are in a very, very lucky part of the world, and the reason why is we have the Great Lakes. Nothing beats the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes is a great source of the stability of our climate system in Wisconsin. Okay, if we don't have the Great Lakes, ladies and gentlemen, life would be really, really awful in Wisconsin. It will be like living in Arizona again. I don't even know why anyone wants to live in Arizona anyway, but I digress. Okay, so the last learning objective about this is the population impact. And the population impact can be measured by this actually three, I'm just going to change it a little bit, by these three variables here: population, affluence, and technology affects the environment impact. So the higher the population, the more people there is on the planet, the more impact we obviously have on the environment, right? It just makes sense. And the reason why that is, we as humans are consumers, right? So we will eat more producers, we will consume more goods, we need to have, we need to create energy for us to heat our homes, to cool our homes, right? To keep life comfortable for us. So that's obviously impact is directly related to population. The higher the population, the higher the impact. So that's A. The second variable is affluence, which is consumption per person. So this is actually measured by GDP, and it should make sense. So more rich countries actually have a higher impact on the environment. Why is that? When you have money, like the United States, we have lots of money, as opposed to, let's say, Haiti. Haiti, they don't have a lot of money. Okay, when we have a lot of money, we are able to buy more expensive products like Apple iPhones or MacBook Pros or Surface Pros. Okay, all of this fancy gizmo technologies. Okay, the problem with a lot of these technologies is the things that we consume takes more components to make. So it's not simple as like buying a banana, right? We're buying a product that is made from 50 different components that have to come from 50 different sources. Okay, so that is why the more affluent a country is, the higher the consumption. Okay, so that's one thing. The last variable that actually is directly related to impact, and this is actually where it could be a paradoxical, or it could go opposite, could go different ways, is technology. Okay, and the reason why technology could either increase or decrease impact is, let's say if you have a car, obviously a normal car that is a 12-cylinder, 10 miles per gallon has a huge impact on the environment, right? But what happens if you have a fully electric car, right? So if you have a fully electric car, it actually lessens the impact on the environment. But if you have a gas guzzler, that actually has a very high impact on the environment. So this is a very, very important concept here. So know that this is direct. The higher the population, the higher the impact. The higher the GDP, the higher the impact. But technology is paradoxical, meaning to say that technology can either have a positive or negative impact on the environment. So if you multiply all of this by t, if t is less than 1, the impact actually becomes less. Think about it. If 2 times 2 is 4 times 1/2, what's a half of a 4 is 2, right? So it becomes less. If this was bigger than 1, this number then becomes bigger as well. All right, so just very cognizant that technology is a paradoxical factor. Now, why? So these are just 4 major issues that actually are related to population. Urbanization meaning to say that we now basically build houses in areas that didn't used to have any houses. And obviously, if you urbanize an area, that means to say that you have to clear the plants, you have to clear the trees, you have to reroute the rivers, you have to dam the lakes. Okay, so that's actually what habitat destruction is. And as we have more population of the world, what happens is we need to feed the world, right? So there's 8 billion people in the world right now, so we need to feed all these 8 billion people, which means to say that our farming practices then becomes, there's a lot of stress, and there's a lot of use of fertilizers and pesticides. And what happens is we exhaust the soil, because what happens now is instead of like farming twice a year, because now we need to feed more people, we might need to, in this case, harvest 3-4 more times a year. So that obviously has a big impact, all right, on our environment, on sustainability practices. Okay, so and we can actually synthesize this, and this is all about, if you remember the first law of thermodynamics, in which case we say that matter cannot be created or destroyed, and can only be converted from one form to the other. And what happens is the more people you have, the higher the demand for goods and services, and specifically goods, right? Food is a very important example. Water is a very important example. These are goods, all right? These are capital goods. These are capital resources that we need to live. Well, if the more people you have, well, obviously, the more you use the water, right? The more you're gonna obviously consume energy, and obviously a lot of this have a direct impact, negative impact on the environment. Okay, so I don't think that should be a puzzle to a lot of people and to a lot of us in this case. Now, again, fertilizers and pesticides, again, a lot of this is based because we need to feed 8 billion people. Okay. Unluckily, the problem with this is here in Wisconsin, we actually have a lot of goods. We have a lot, beef is cheap, milk is cheap, vegetables at the market is cheap, right? Generally speaking. But if you go to a lot of other countries, especially in Africa, you should understand that there's famine, there's poverty going on right now in those countries. And we have a lot in this country, but there's a lot of countries out there that don't have a lot. And a lot of these problems then eventually come back to bite us. Okay, so I'm not gonna digress any further about terrorism and stuff like that, but sustainability issues are actually related to terrorism. I want you to just imagine. I'm just gonna take hopefully just a minute here. Imagine that you live in Libya, right? In which you have a 50-acre farm, and now your 50-acre farm, because of lack of technology, because of lack of good practices, is now in this case non-arable, meaning to say that you can no longer plant anything. Okay, what happens? Well, there's no game in town, so now you're unemployed. Let's say Al-Qaeda comes and says, oh, well, we'll give you $50 a day to become a member of Al-Qaeda. Now, for you as a farmer, it's actually not about being a member of Al-Qaeda because you hate the United States. It's because, I need a job. I need to feed my family, right? I need to feed my children. So you have to understand that a lot of these issues that actually we take for granted actually have direct relationships to our national security. Okay, and so when countries in the world actually have lack of food and services, we need to understand that eventually comes back to bite us. Okay, especially with globalization the way it's going on right now. All right, here are just some harmful effects of poverty, and again, so Bill Gates, the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, is actually looking for the world's first clean toilet, I think, and the lack of sanitation facilities, again, hand washing, toilet, and stuff like that, has been killing. Okay, 2.6 billion people do not have access to good, adequate sanitation facilities. That gives a lot of diseases. Okay, that actually has a lot of death in this case. But if you look at this one, right, all of this poverty, and again, poverty comes from lack of resources driven by demands from other countries.